Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Merle Massie, and I'm the coordinator of undergraduate research here at the University of Saskatchewan. And it's a pleasure to be here today. Our session is around what it takes to be a grad student, really is sort of the high level topic. But our topic today is, what is grad studies really like? And this presentation, as this roundtable, comes in from the SURE session, so the Student Undergraduate Research Experience. I'm the coordinator of that particular program. And with us today, we have Badushi Siddiqa, who will be here in a minute. She's just running a little bit late, but she's coming. Matthew Kunkel, Sydney Murray, who's also running a little late, but she's going to be joining us, and Vicky Parole. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for our speakers for being with us today and offering their time. And I'm going to actually ask Vicky to start us off. And I just want you to tell the people your name, your discipline, in case I didn't pronounce your name correctly, which is always possible, and your name, your discipline, and then we'll move on to Matthew, and hopefully we'll have Badushi by then as well. So Vicky, if you want to introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Vicky Parole, and I just finished my master's thesis actually in the College of Education. So I did a master's in educational administration.
Fantastic. And Matthew.
Yeah, hey everyone. My name is Matthew Kunkel. I'm doing my master's in history, and I just finished my first year of a 2-year program.
Fantastic. I'm a historian, so I like huge love for all the history majors out there. So that's great. Badushi or Sydney, have you managed to come yet? Haven't seen them, but they're on their way. That's okay. We'll bring them into the fold as they come along. Matthew, since we've got you kind of live and online, can you tell us what was your reasoning for entering graduate studies? Why did you choose to enter grad studies?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I did my undergrad at U of T. I'm from Toronto. My major was actually urban studies in my undergrad, so I kind of switched gears a bit for my master's. My main reason for doing my master's is basically just I enjoyed my undergrad quite a bit. I like the research aspect, and just having the opportunity in your master's to kind of work on a project like independently for a whole thesis. It's not just like taking coursework, doing independent, like doing research papers. It's more just the opportunity to work on a complete project. And I guess honestly, if I'm being candid, like I would rather to be in school again than to go into the workforce, try to find a job. I really enjoyed school, and so for me, it was just a good opportunity, and the program at the U of S really fit for me. So that's the main reason I decided to come.
And I think that that's amazing that you come from U of T to come and do your master's at the U of S. It tells me that maybe there was a draw around the person that you're working with for your master's. Was that okay? So supervisor was part of the draw.
Yeah, well, especially like in my I did a lot with like GIS, so geographic information systems, in my urban studies kind of city planning, and they have a really kind of unique lab at the U of S, the HGIS lab. And then one professor, his name's Dr. Hoy, to supervise me. He's the director of the lab, so it was just a really good fit. Yeah, so it was a good opportunity.
I think that that's fabulous. Thank you very much. And Vicky, could you tell us about your path? What made you decide to jump into graduate school?
So I did my undergraduate degree in English here at the University of Saskatchewan. I finished a number of years ago. So I actually entered the workforce after finishing my undergraduate degree and worked for a number of years at the university. And I've kind of always been in school. Even when I was working at the university, I just continued to take classes for interest's sake. And I kind of decided that I might as well put those towards something. And so for me, it was a lot about professional growth. And also, my undergrad experience was a little bit different. I wasn't a top-notch student, and I didn't enjoy the undergraduate aspect as much, but in graduate studies, you really get to follow and pursue something that's really interesting to you, and you get to make it a little bit more about you and what you want to pursue. So that was a big part of my choosing graduate studies, is just being able to focus in on leadership and post-secondary education is kind of the stream that I chose, and focus on something that I was interested in, and career growth. I just knew that it would be, especially working at the university, I knew that it would really help me level up. And that's my dog, Tesla.
It's all right. Dogs, cats, you know, they all show, hedgehogs, they all show up. It's all great. It's part of our online experience. Badusha, you're here. Thank you so much. If you could introduce yourself as say what discipline you're in, and then we've moved forward to the first question, which was, what was your reason for entering graduate studies?
Okay. Hi everyone. First of all, I'm so sorry for the late. I kind of slept in, but it's okay. So I am Vidushi, and I am right now in my kind of like a transitional phase. I'm finishing up my master's thesis at the University of Saskatchewan in psychology, and I'm gonna start my PhD in social psychology at Western University. And my research area is kind of related to uh, feminism and social psychology, specifically like looking at the experiences of racialized slash immigrant women. And in answering to the question, the reason why I entered grad school, well, to be honest, I was not this ambitious when I thought that I will go to grad school. I started psychology because I really liked the content, but then I heard that with an undergrad degree in psychology, there are no jobs. So I thought maybe I should go for grad school, but then as I progressed in my senior years, I realized how passionate I am about the topic, and the things like the topics that makes me really like involved, like to the point that I took study not as a study but more of like I, I really enjoyed studying. So that's why I got into grad school, because I like research. I am a nerd, and so yeah.
You notice how that made all of us smile? It's like, yeah, we're all nerds. This is the thing. We could be nerds in different things, but that, you know, we like to learn. And so, you know, this is an obvious place to be. Um, there's a leap between being an undergraduate student and being a graduate student. I would like each of you to talk about that leap. How hard was that leap? How big was that leap? What was that gap like? How did you manage it? Tell me about that leap from being an undergraduate to being a graduate student. And Matthew, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, there is definitely a leap. Like, you don't want to maybe go into graduate school thinking that it's going to be the exact same as undergrad, because that's not going to be the case. Um, One of the biggest differences, I guess, right off the jump in terms of class size, like I did my undergrad at U of T. Even in my fourth year, the classes were like 40, 50 people. In my first year of my master's, the class, it was like 4 people. So you really expected, you need to come prepared. There's a lot more readings for the humanities, from my perspective, like from my background, a lot more readings. So you have to kind of be prepared. You're expected to do a lot more participation. Um, and just the need to be a lot more, I'd say, independent and self-motivated. Like, it's not like undergrad where, you know, you maybe have weekly assignments, or you have a couple papers due each term, and if you kind of fall behind, your professors will realize, your TAs will realize, and they can kind of help you out. In graduate school, it's very much, you have a research project, and you kind of have to set your own deadlines, be self-motivated. If you fall behind, there's not as many people that are maybe gonna, for like checks and balances. So those are probably a couple of the biggest changes, I would say, the things that you kind of have to get adjusted to.
Thank you, Matthew. And Vicky.
I think for me, like there absolutely is a leap. I think that I took a number of years off between my degrees, so I think that it was not as much of a shock, I guess, moving from undergraduate to graduate studies, and I was definitely more prepared the second time around. Matthew's absolutely right that there is more expectation to be involved and participate, and you're you're not just going to be able to sit in the background and kind of take everything in and then write a test and then move on to the next course. You're expected to have more original ideas and kind of be contributing a little bit more than you are in undergraduate, where I found that undergrad was more kind of learning and feeding back the information again. So it's more about your own kind of self-discovery as well, but definitely more time for independent work and more expectations for contributing in the classroom. So if that's something that you can start doing now as an undergraduate student, getting used to speaking up and making sure that you're keeping up with all of your readings, that's definitely a way that you can prepare yourself for that transition.
Good piece of advice. Bidushi, what did you find in that leap between being an undergraduate and a graduate student?
Okay, thank you for the question. Uh, First of all, I would like to add that I took a year gap in between my undergrad and grad school because I did apply for grad school, but then at the last moment, I got a full-time job offer from my supervisor to be a research lab coordinator. I thought that it would be a really nice experience to apply all the skills that I have earned in my undergrad years into this job. So I chose to work for a year, and it was really like fruitful, I would say. Like I got more used to the research culture, which was not there in undergrad. Like it was just in the last year when I was doing my honors. But then like doing that job and being used to the research culture kind of gave me a feel of how the grad school is going to look like, except the classes, of course. The classes are like we are expected to be more involved as like you guys said. So the biggest difference is like in undergrad I could skip classes and still get an 80, but then in grad school there is like expectation to participate. There is a huge like participation grade, and then there are expectations to do presentations, to lead discussions, like be a like guest lecturer for a day or something. So in grad school, definitely there is no scope of like skipping classes, but then I don't want to scare anyone, like, because in grad school, the classes you do are more related to the things you want to do. So like you get more involved, you get more passionate, whereas in undergrad, it's just like more of like following the instructions. And then
Checking the box.
yeah, and then in grad school you get like your own ideas, you share your own ideas, you talk in the class. So that's the difference. And yeah, I guess yes.
Thanks, Bidushi. Sydney is here. So Sydney gets to do three things at once. First of all, to introduce yourself. Second, what was your reason for entering grad studies, and kind of just talk about that path. And then I'll tell you the third question in a second. So those two first. Go, Sid.
Okay, so sorry I'm late to the party, but hi, my name is Sydney Murray. So I started master's in toxicology after finishing my undergrad in 2020, so in the COVID year. I'm now starting at the College of Medicine as a medical student in August, so it's been a bit of a weird transition for me. But one of the reasons why I wanted to do grad school was because my last 2 years, I was originally in Phys Pharm, and then I ended up jumping into toxicology. And I just felt like there was so much left that I hadn't uncovered, and there's so many stones that I hadn't unturned. So for me, also, it was to also one day potentially get a job in industry. And I knew that my bachelor was probably not going to take me there. So I think that's probably the first two questions. Then Merle hit me with the last one.
Tell me about the leap from being an undergraduate to being a graduate student.
Okay, so I would say probably my biggest piece of advice that they probably don't tell you is, so when you're in your undergrad, as much as you think that you're like completely self-sufficient and you're on your own time and everything, they still schedule all your classes for you. They tell you all the assignments that you have to get done. But when you go into grad school, you really have to be self-sufficient and schedule your own time accordingly. So one of the biggest pieces of advice that I wish someone would have told me, which you eventually learn, is that you really have to be a self-motivated learner, whether that comes to planning your own experiments, whether that comes to you have a knowledge gap that you want to fill in on your own. So you really have to be that person that's self-motivated, and you're not kind of, I would say, dragging your heels in your undergrad waiting for someone to tell you what to do.
That's an excellent piece of advice. So that was your biggest leap, was like everything was a little bit more scheduled in undergrad, and
Yeah.
then graduate is like, okay, here's this unscheduled chunk of time.
Yeah.
You have to figure out how to fill it.
Exactly, yeah. And just kind of being your own kind of hype person and making sure that you're scheduling everything accordingly and how much can you handle.
That's a really good point, and I think that we should come back to that as well a little bit later on in terms of knowing what you can handle, because there are stresses to being a graduate student. And actually, let's talk about that. What were some of your biggest stresses as soon when you became a graduate student? What were some of the things that you felt like there was extra pressure? And Sid, you're on, so you might as well just keep going.
Okay, so I think two of the biggest pressures for me was I really looked up to my supervisors because they were I had a few classes with them. I just really thought they were really great people. And so I always had this, and I think this is when you're a type A student, you always want to be perfect. And when you're in your undergrad, you're striving for perfection in everything you do, whether that's an assignment, a poster. So I always felt like if I had to ask for help, or if I didn't understand something, that I had to hide that from my supervisors. But that's so far from the truth, which I learned later after talking to fellow grad students. They want to help you, and they also know that you don't know everything and that you have a lot to learn too, especially when you go from an undergrad to a master's. You're just kind of starting to get in that driver's seat of kind of steering your own education. But I think that's probably one of the big ones. And then also another big stressor for me was with COVID. I was lucky enough that I was in a lab with a bunch of other people, but it can be really isolating and feeling like you're the only one that's going through this kind of imposter syndrome, which I'm assuming in this panel will throw around a lot. But they do not expect you to know everything. And when you go from undergrad, like my fourth year, I really felt like I had a really great base. I knew what I was doing. I was organized. I was scheduled. Kind of felt like on top of my game. And then I went to grad school, and I was like, oh my Lord, I'm a newbie. I'm a beginner. I'm a first year again. So I think that was my two biggest stressors.
Super. I think that you bring so much to that. I should have been taking notes so that we come back to, but imposter syndrome. That's a good one. Vicky, how about you? What are some of your stressors as a graduate student?
I think that for me, one of the biggest things is time management, and part of that's working full time and then being able to manage the working and the grad school at the same time, especially during COVID-19 when my office was the same office all day long and then I'm still at home in the evening. But I think that we're talking a lot about initiative and keeping track of your own deadlines and everything. So you will still have coursework in your graduate studies, but I think when it comes time to doing a thesis, if that's something that you choose to pursue, you're kind of setting your own deadlines and making sure that you're moving your own things along. And there's you're not turning over to a new course at the end of a term, but you have to kind of plan everything out. And sometimes it feels like you have unlimited time, and sometimes it feels like there's not enough time. So really figuring out how to manage those deadlines and communicating with your supervisor in how they can help you manage those deadlines as well and keep things moving along.
Those are really, really good points. How about you, Badushi? What were some of your biggest stresses as a graduate student, as a master's student?
So I would definitely agree with Sydney in terms of like the pressure to be as perfect as we can be. Like I get paranoid about like typos and like all those stuff, and like kind of not like disappointing my supervisor in any way. But then I understand that I'm just like overthinking. So like there is that, and also there is the pressure to like gain as much experience as possible. Like say yes to everything. I guess you know that very well. So like gaining as much like experience, opportunities, doing things like publishing papers, etc. But then I realized that it's okay to say no, it's okay to take a break. Right now I'm not doing anything, so like there's that pressure as well. And one thing that really kind of hit me hard is like the pressure to talk and the pressure to lead in the class, which was not me. Like in undergrad, I used to be kind of hiding in the crowd as much as possible. But then in grad school, there's like presentations, leading discussions, and like all those stuff. So me being a person with speech problems and anxiety, I was so much pressured to like kind of taking the lead, which I don't see myself as a leader somehow. So there was that pressure as well. And with terms of like time management and organizing things, I kind of learned during that transitional phase, like between my undergrad and grad school, like I can use like apps like to-do list, calendar, etc. to keep myself updated with all my stuff. So I started doing that and it really helped.
Matthew, how about you? What were some of your biggest pressures, or what are some of your biggest pressures as a master's student?
Yeah, I might echo what a few people have said, but I would say like one of the main things, like so you're just entering your grad school, you're starting your master's, and you look at the whole list of like your degree requirements. You have to do your coursework. I have like a 100 thesis you have to do, where in your undergrad you probably haven't written like maybe 10-page papers before or something. You probably maybe there's a conference, like maybe that's like an additional thing, you want to publish paper or something, and so that's just a lot to look at. I would say try to just take it step by step. Like for the first thing, finish the coursework, then try to do your research, then the writing, and then so I guess just managing. Don't try to for me it was difficult at first not to be overwhelmed when looking at that and thinking I need to get a head start. Like I'm doing my courses, but I need to get a head start on my research. I need to do this ahead of time because things will take longer than you think. Like I'm learning now. Like I'm just sort of finishing my research, and like I thought, oh, I'll be done my research. I'll just start writing right away. No, that's not the case. You have to organize your notes. You have to make a bunch of outlines. There's a lot of different things. So I guess um, it's things won't be as smooth sailing as maybe expect, and so you kind of do have to roll with some punches. Um, and yeah, I get so, and then try to maybe this is a good thing too. The importance of having a supportive supervisor, someone that you work with, is to set, like first semester, just think about coursework. Don't think about anything else, and then you can kind of go from there and maybe sector it out month by month or week by week. Even just try not to think too far ahead of yourself. For me, that was really important not to get overwhelmed and stressed because you can think about even beyond the degree and everything. So I guess that's the main thing I would.
Those are really, really good, and it actually leads to sort of the next question that just came up that I think we should address, and that is work-life balance. And how do you handle that as a graduate student? Because there's a lot of pressure around, and at the master's and at the PhD level, and depending on the lab or the research group that you're a part of, some of those pressures might be external. There might be expectations to be working evenings, working weekends, these sorts of things, and that can sometimes happen. How do you have any thoughts around that, around addressing and keeping a balance on your work-life balance? Vidushi, maybe we'll start with you.
Okay, so I am not really a good role model in terms of work-life balance. I try now to like do things in a more balanced way, but I have worked in the weekends, I have worked all the time. But now I try to like go outside with my family in the evening, like keeping the evening time like at home with everyone, and also like not being too much desperate to check emails if I have emails in like at evening or at night or etc. Like I always check emails or respond to them in the morning. So having a specific time to check and respond emails, that really helps. And like just having some like free time to go outside, get some fresh air in the evening. I have done that. And also another thing I have recently started doing is like splitting up a project into different tasks. Like I will do this task in day one and then this task in day two, and that also helps to keep the time in check. Like I don't do one thing for all day, all night long. So yeah, I have started doing that very recently.
But that's good learning. You realize, okay, I have no work-life balance, so now I have to do something about it. Vicky, you have a full-time job on top of your master's. How do you pull off work-life balance? Because a lot of graduate students are doing either a part-time or a full-time job and then graduate studies. You're not alone in this. So how do you pull it off?
I think for me, one of the biggest things is if you're doing grad studies, it should be something that you're passionate about. I'm assuming that's why you're doing grad studies. So for me, there was really a synergy between my work life and my school life, and it didn't. People were like, "How are you spending all this time doing this?" But I really felt that working on one really got me excited about the other. So I think that really helped with the work-life balance. Environment, I would say, especially this last year, I've learned a lot about the environment and how that helps me keep a balance. But sometimes you need a change of scenery. You might need to head up to the cabin and work from the cabin for a few days, or having that dedicated space. I was working for a while from my dining room table, and that just you just see it all the time, and it's really hard to take a break if you're seeing your work in front of you all the time. So if you can put your office behind a closed door and really leave your space, and like Badushi said, not check your email in the evenings, that makes a huge difference. And I think that one of the biggest things was have conversations with people in your life, whether that's supervisors at work or your partner or your family or your friends, and making sure that they're kind of cheerleaders for you and supporting you, and allowing you to have that time to work, and understanding if you can't always make things work on your social calendar, but also making sure that they are allowing you and encouraging you to take breaks as well. So really make sure you've got some people on your side that can support you through your time as a grad student.
I know that one of the pieces of advice that I received was to make sure that you have friends that are outside of graduate, who are not doing graduate studies. That was one of the best pieces of advice I received, and I live in a small town, so that was good because there was a lot of people that had no idea what I was doing and why was I reading 200 books when I was doing my yeah. So I just to add on to that, I think that what you said, Vicky, was incredible to make sure that the people within your space are supportive of what you're doing, but also to reach out beyond grad studies. That would be something that I would add to that. Matthew, how do you keep a work-life balance?
Yeah, the point you just made was one I was going to say too. Like, just the importance to have maintain like hobbies, activities, friendships outside of academia. I think is really important because, like you can kind of work to set like, okay, I'm going to do 8 hours on my research today. I'm going to shut the door to my office. I'm not going to. But then even if you're out and you're still talking with like maybe people in your program or something, you're still gonna be thinking about it. Like it's good to, like for me, I play soccer like a few times a week in the evenings, and that's a very important time for me just to sort of forget about my research for just a few hours, like do something, talk to people that have no idea about what you're doing. So it's nice just to be like take a break from everything. Um, I think that another thing that's really important is to maybe set some boundaries with your supervisor or with people too. Like if you don't want to be receiving emails in the evening, I don't want to be emails like in the evening, or I'm not going to answer emails between certain times, because there is a pressure. If you're just on your phone in the night and you get an email, like people, especially like my supervisor, for instance, if I send him an email at 10 at night, he'll probably get back to me within 20 minutes. Whereas if that's the case for me, I'm probably not going to want to be responding until the next morning or something. And so that's just something you kind of have to tell people. And there's no again, if you have a good relationship, I don't feel pressure telling him that I don't want to respond in the evening. Like that's just not something I want to do. So I guess work-life balance for me, it's maybe not as much a struggle for some people. I'm pretty good about. I think like after dinner, like in the evening, weekends, I'm good at shutting everything off. for me, it's very important because otherwise I would get burnt out. Like the work-life balance is really important and not getting burnt out.
One of the advantages of being in history and you know, sort of like the archive is only open from, you know, 8:30 to 4:30, whatever, you know, so if you're in that research phase, you've got some limitations that way, which helps. But if you're in a wet lab and you've got fish to feed, or you've got, you know, frogs to look after, or whatever it is, sometimes that can spill across sort of evenings and weekends. And Sid, can you talk about what happens in toxicology?
Yeah, so I started grad school in September and I got completely thrown into a rainbow trout exposure. So I lived in the toxicology center building for probably about 20 hours a day for 2 weeks, 2 months. And so I know that's not very indicative, but kind of speaking to my experience, there are going to be times of like a grind and then there are going to be times of rest. The one point that Matthew made, which I really want to speak to, is he said, my supervisor is really good about understanding. I don't know if we've talked about this yet, but it's so important to know what your supervisor is like before you start grad school with them, because it makes or breaks your grad school experience. My supervisor, like Matthew said, they're very good in understanding. Unfortunately, though, not all supervisors are created equal. And so different supervisors expect different things from different students. So, like, some supervisors do expect you to be in the lab every weekend. So, talk to grad students that are in that supervisor's lab before you start, because grad students will be completely honest with you about their experiences. Like, they will tell you whether they're having a good time or whether they're not. Also, the other thing, I know that it's so easy for me to say, get involved in hobbies. But one of the things that I experienced in the start of my undergrad, and it kind of bubbled up in master's, was feeling guilt while I was taking time off. So when you step away from your computer, when you go to the lake, whether you're going to play soccer or whatever, you really have to kind of put that mentality in like a mental bucket, leave it to the side, and just enjoy the time that you're taking away. Because if I'm going to go to soccer and I'm kicking a ball, and the only thing I'm worried about is, oh my gosh, I think my qPCR assay failed and what's how this is going to affect my thing, then you're really not even enjoying your time off. And that is, I still have to learn that skill. I'll probably be learning that skill my whole life, but just really being able to compartmentalize your life in that regard, when grad school can feel at times super consuming as well.
I really, really appreciate that point that you made, Sid, around supervisors. And just to repeat what you said, make sure that you talk to graduate students in that lab, in that department, who have worked with that supervisor before you make the commitment to join. A really good supervisor will give you the names of existing and past graduate students so that you can have that frank talk with them. If you ask a potential supervisor for names and they don't give them to you, or they want, well, what do you want to talk to them for? That's a red flag. Please keep that in mind. If they're not confident enough in their supervisory capability to let you talk to the existing graduate students, then you know that that's a serious red flag. And I don't care if they're the leading person in their field and they've got 50 publications or 500 publications. I don't care. Your personal experience really, really does matter. And it is always within your right to say no at any point within your program. And that's tough because there's, and maybe we should talk about that a little bit, about the power differential between students and supervisors or other people in the lab. But that does matter. And I appreciate that all four of you have mentioned really good relationships with your supervisors. But without naming names, maybe let's have just a quick round about some of the negative experiences that you know that other graduate students, again, without naming names, perhaps every one of you might know of someone, a graduate student friend, who's had a tough experience. And if you can tell those stories without any identifying details, that might be a good thing, to just to recognize that it isn't all sunshine and roses. Sometimes you can have some mismatches between a student and a supervisor that has nothing to do. You're both both could be good people, but you've got a mismatch somewhere along the way, and that does happen. Matthew, do you want to just jump in? Since you came from another university, perhaps you might have an example from another university that we don't know about.
Yeah, well, I guess I could start. I think so. One of the main things, I guess, in grad school is sometimes you'll be working with your supervisor not related to your thesis. Like if maybe you're working on a research assignment with them, and so maybe you can be sort of working with them in two capacities. One is as a student supervisor relationship. The other one is maybe like sort of a they're like a team manager and you're just working on the team for a different project. And that's an important distinction too, because those are two different times. Like if maybe you're on work hours and they want to keep talking to you about your school project or something, or you say, I'm available to talk about this. And I knew someone that kept getting like FaceTimes from the supervisor. And it's like, if you're at home and you don't really want to be getting FaceTimes from your supervisor, that's something maybe you want to have assigned meeting times, or like whether you're going to do a Zoom or something. And another thing maybe is just, if you feel like they're being overly nitpicky, there are certain deadlines you have to make, whether for history, there's thesis proposal. That was one thing I knew of another student. And you kind of want that done by a certain month, by a certain time, in order for everything to go along smoothly, where you get started on your research, everything else. If you feel like your supervisor is maybe delaying that process, like they keep going over your drafts over and over again, they're never giving you the okay, that can be very tough, especially because that's someone who you expected to trust. They're the one that you're supposed to look to for advice. And if they feel like you feel like they're overly criticizing your work, and that can just be a tough thing to do. Maybe you have to talk to your committee about that, or so yeah, again, like it's not all sunshine and roses. There can be some sticky situations where it is difficult to navigate, and I think it's important to be upfront with your supervisor if there is something that you don't feel is going well, because it'll even make things worse if you just secretly behind their back like don't like them, and maybe there's some spite or something. So I think just upfront, even if you don't really have a best like personal relationship with them, it's important to maybe try to be professional and just tell them how you're feeling about what they're doing.
How about the rest of you? Any recommendations for managing that student supervisor relationship?
I
Or
think for
stories?
me, the biggest thing is really talking about expectations at the beginning and revisiting those expectations as well. You're not going to be the only student that your supervisor is supervising. And I think that every student has different needs and different ways that they work. And when I started working with my supervisor, she asked me like, what do you need from me? Like, do you want me to be hands off and let you kind of go at your own? Do you want me to check in? Do you want to set up regular monthly meetings or set them up as we need them? And understanding, the big thing for me was understanding like feedback and when I could expect feedback, and really knowing I need to know. So it's just kind of saying, this is what would be helpful for me if this is something that we can do, and having those conversations and revisiting those throughout the process.
Fantastic. Sid, or any recommendations on managing the student supervisor relationship?
I think one of the comments that Vicky was really that hands-off versus hands-on approach to grad school. And like I am like one of my like friends, I'll just say, her supervisor was very, very, very hands-off, and she needed someone who was really hands-on. And so unfortunately that she no longer ended up kind of going forth with what she was doing. But I really like how Vicky said, establishing that the supervisor, because I know for me, I like to kind of check in along the way, and I like to know that what I'm doing is correct, and kind of like getting that validation, because it is so important when you're just starting out. So yeah, I'm like having that supervisor be like, I need a bit more hands-on in the beginning, but I can kind of self-manage along the way. So yeah, that's a really great point, Vicky.
Super. Badushi, you want to add anything? Student supervisor relationship?
Yes, I would like to agree that like having the conversation about expectations is really important, which I have not seen based on my own experiences. And yeah, like I don't know, like it's like yeah, hold on, sorry. So like the expectations can be around like if like hands-on or hands-off, and then when the supervisor responds to emails. And I have seen like my friends struggling with that, and so having that conversation is really important. And what and also, like, I have seen a friend, like, she has ADHD, and there is like on campus there is not that much of resources for grad students who who access an equity. services, but then she did gain access, and then from there they told her to talk to her supervisor and sign on like an agreement or kind of like that on the like accommodation that she needs. And the supervisor kind of got mad about it because like the supervisor thought that like why would anyone else evaluate her or something like that. So being more open, being more having more conversations is really important.
Awesome. I'm putting into the chat. So the College of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies at USask has created a student supervisor agreement. It's for thesis-based programs, but if you are thinking of entering graduate studies and doing a thesis-based program, this was adapted from the University of Manitoba, and the Canadian Association of Graduate Studies had some recommendations on what to put in. We don't yet have one at the undergraduate level for student supervisor agreements. It's something that my office is looking at and considering, but this has been created at the graduate level. And so this is a good document for everyone to read, simply to give a bit of an overview of the sorts of things that could be part of that larger conversation. And yet, it's still fairly high level. Some of the interesting things that you four have brought to the table around, do you need me to be hands-on or hands-off? Do you need weekly check-ins? Do you need, or ask them, how soon, if I send you a draft of something, how soon can you turn that around? When can I expect it back? These sorts of conversations. And so my own boss calls that managing up. And that's part of what you have to do as a graduate student, is that you do have to kind of take a little bit of control and responsibility for that and manage your supervisor, which is not an easy thing to do, especially if you've never managed someone above you before. There's a whole skill set around that, so something to think about. All right, my last question, and I'm going to ask it to Padushi first because she's already on my screen. So there we go. Your top pieces of advice for an undergraduate student who's looking at entering graduate studies. And that could be anywhere from they're just thinking about it, they're considering it, all the way to they've already been accepted, and what next? What are some of your top pieces of advice?
Mm-hmm. So my first advice is doing a lot of research on the like university that the student is planning to go to, and some potential list of supervisors. Like based on my experience, I was from University of Saskatchewan when I entered grad school, but for my PhD I checked like I have browsed through every single thing of the institution website. I checked the department website and also made a list of like potential supervisors who I am going to contact to, and also their research interest. Like one thing that I have understood is just for the sake of finding a supervisor, you don't email them. It should be you guys have some kind of research interest in common, because having a supervisor with similar interest is really important. And then I have had situation when I was in really a need of a supervisor, so there might not be some common stuff. So yeah, doing research and also being mentally prepared about grad school. It's nothing like undergrad. It's much more of taking initiatives, talking and taking leads and etc. So being mentally prepared about grad school. And the third thing is like looking for ways, looking for resources for time organization, time commitment, because as we talked about, it's a lot of self-directed and motivating process. So doing that as well, using to-do list, using calendar, looking for on-campus resources and etc.
Sydney, how about you? What are your top
Okay,
three pieces
I
of
wrote
advice?
down three kind of things I've had for this. So my first one is get to know your supervisor because they really make or break your grad experience. Two, enjoy the project that you've been given. So don't just take a project because it's available. Like even if you have to wait out a year to find one that you enjoy, because I like to use the analogy of it's like starting a documentary on Netflix and you watch the first episode, you think it's really good, and then you watch the second one and it's terrible and there's like 10 more and you're like, oh, I gotta commit to finishing it. You don't want to end up on the second episode and hate your documentary series. And then the third one that I would say, which I would emphasize the most, is comparison is the theft of joy. And so if you're always comparing yourself to other grad students, comparing your timeline, everything, you just start to have a lot of self-doubt. But just remember, everyone in grad studies, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself here, feels self-doubt at one point or another. So you are not alone. Meet people, contact people, and just your supervisor would not have taken you if they didn't think that you could do it. So know your supervisor has faith in you and have faith in yourself. Because I wish someone would have told me that when I started.
I wrote that down. Comparison is the thief of joy. That is a meme, man. We're gonna create that. That's fantastic. Vicky, what are your top three pieces of advice?
I think that for me, everything in grad studies seemed so esoteric, and I felt like I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything, and everybody else seemed to know what was going on. But the further along I got in it, I realized that nobody really knows what's going on. So ask lots of questions, and definitely don't feel like you're alone. Like I was like, I had no idea what the processes were. It's just nobody really knows. Everybody's figuring it out. You're still a student. You don't need to know everything. You're still there to learn and grow. So do that and ask the questions and learn and grow. And I think that the biggest thing for me is find something that you're really passionate about. Grad studies really gives you the opportunity to pursue something that you are very interested in and make it your own. And uh, the documentary analogy, if you get into something and you find that it's not for you, it's okay to switch gears a little bit. I wrote an entire literature review for one thesis topic, and then I was like, you know what? Nope. And started over. So it's okay to switch things up because you are going to spend a lot of time talking about and researching and editing, and if you get sick of it, you're just not going to have the drive to move forward. So make sure that it's something that you're really interested in. I think that it probably sounds a little bit scary, all these things we talked about being able to manage your own time, having to speak up more in class. But if you're finding something that you're really passionate about, then you're able to manage your time and you want to speak up in class because you're excited about it. So make sure you're doing something that's interesting to you and that you see a future in for yourself.
Matthew, that was great. Thanks, Vicky. Matthew, what are your top three pieces of advice?
Yeah, this might be reiterating a few things that we've said so far, but the first thing, I mean, we're talking about relationship with the supervisor so much because that's not a joke. Like, it's really important to have a good relationship with your supervisor. And I think the first thing that you can do to cultivate that is look beforehand. Like, not only send emails to outreach with potential supervisors that you're talking about, talk to them on the phone. If it's feasible that you can go to the school in person to meet them in person before you're starting the program, that's something that's really important. You get along with the supervisor, it's going to make your whole experience at grad school a lot better. The second thing, something else we've touched on, is it's important to maintain relationships, maintain hobbies outside of academia. I think that's really crucial for me, especially. That's something that's been really helpful. And third, something that's also been touched on, make sure the project or the program that you're in is something that you really can actually get excited about, that you're passionate about. There's a big difference between if you feel like what you're doing is more of an obligation for maybe really just for career advancement, or maybe there's family pressure that you should get a degree and do certain things. If you're actually really excited about the project, like it's something that it's much easier to get self-motivated about, and it will impact your level of interest and just the commitment that you're able to put into it. If it's something that you really like, it's going to affect your experience and it's going to make it easier for you to experience success.
I think those are brilliant, and this is what I'm going to do next. I'm actually going to stop the recording, and a round of applause to all of you for being speakers, but then I'm going to open up the floor to questions. And the reason why I don't want to record the questions is because just in case someone has something, and there's questions, there's hands going up left, right, and center. So I'm stopping the recording. Thank you for joining us, and we'll keep on going in a second.